Welcome to the No Streetlights podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Tim. We'll be engaging in stimulating conversations every week.
We want to encourage societal growth towards kindness through understanding.
These conversations and the associated language can be triggering.
Listen at your own discretion.
But please reach out if we need to be doing something better.
So, let's take a breath, relax, and be welcome.
So, Aaron, who did you bring on the podcast today?
I brought on Dr. Ben Green, a traditional Chinese medicine doctor who taught me Kung Fu and taught me how to argue.
That's good.
Yes.
We just had an intriguing 10-minute long conversation about how time is relative and whether or not it actually exists.
Yes. So I'm reaching out to my physicist buddy. Stand by for that episode, everyone.
Ben, welcome to the podcast.
How have you been?
I've been well. How about yourself?
Good, going through it, but that's how we experience time.
I've been going around it, but that's life.
Around or through, those are our two options, huh? Ben, do you want to introduce yourself? Maybe give some of your credentials?
Sure. So I'm Ben, or Dr. Ben. I'm a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine and I guess herbology, so to speak. I come from a movement background and martial arts primarily. Did a little bit of time in the military after I left you guys at the Kung Fu school. I think Aaron's talked about that in some length here on the podcast, so no need to rehash that. And then went off to the military for a little bit, got out, got the government to pay for me to get my doctorate. And now I'm doing that just outside of Austin, Texas.
That's really exciting.
It is.
You've done Shaolin Kung Fu. I know you're really into Filipino martial arts with the stick fighting and the footwork. I
started out obviously in the Shaolin Kung Fu there, kind of along with you. Mm-hmm. And then when I was in the military, I kind of would show up wherever I could to like learn a little bit here and there, but was never in one place long enough to really claim anything. Mm-hmm. Like I got to do some like pretty cool Southern Manta stuff when I was in right outside Nashville. And then I got to do, some Brazilian jiu-jitsu and things of that nature, but didn't spend a lot of time on those. And then finally, when I was here in Austin for a while, obviously the first thing I did, as anybody who's studied martial arts and is into that thing or into anything does, right, when they move to a new area, is who can I find? And I kind of went back and forth. There were a few Kung Fu schools here, different types. I worked at a gym with a guy who was a Mantis practitioner, so that was kind of cool. And then, through the internet, I made some connections in Colorado and through some people that had studied a similar style to what we had studied. Mm-hmm. And that was all fine and good. But then eventually, over time, I met a guy who started teaching me Filipino martial arts and then another art called Silat, which is Indonesian. And they're very similar. Like they're very closely related geographically. So the arts are very similar. So you can kind of pick one up and then pick the other up pretty quickly. So that's been a lot of fun. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last, quite a few years now.
You sound like a man who's incredibly busy, or a man who at least keeps himself very busy. And yet you still have time to be a doctor. That's pretty incredible.
No, I'm just lucky. I have a wife that is relatively cool. I kind of front loaded all the hard stuff. So when I was in school, like I was working, I did like the work a job, then work a part-time job, became a full-time job, go back to working a part-time job, go to school, do all that kind of stuff. But I also kind of had the benefit of like the government's paying for my schooling. So that was like less stress, which kind of let me get through that. And then, the martial arts, like luckily I found someone who's an instructor, but also an adult. And that's something that is sometimes hard to find from a martial perspective.
Yeah.
So, they get the like, hey, you have a kid and you have a family and we can't. And they're also not particularly interested, I don't think, in like having a big school or a big student body. So that helps. There's a lot of kind of small group training. And it's relatively flexible. So, like that works. But I mean, I live more or less in Austin at this point. And so, I mean, as far as time management goes, like traffic is fun.
That's the bulk of your day.
I mean, it's a third job, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that goes for anybody here. Like, it's not just me. It's anybody. I mean, I'm sure there are worse places. LA, maybe.
Oh my God. LA traffic is horrendous. I spent 90% of my vacation there in a car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think 75% of our video cons, you've been in your car.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, traffic is, it's a thing. It's a thing, but it's also a trade-off, right? Like anything else.
Yeah. But that does sound
if you want to.
very incredible. So what made you so interested in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine by its proper name?
So like most things, martial arts, and Eric can attest to this, but we had kind of, well, one, we had some training that we did that was highly involved with Chinese herbs through martial arts,
Yep.
not making them so much as getting the benefits of them. Some of the training I would not have wanted to do without them, because they're great at kind of tissue healing and repair.
Mhm.
So when you're kicking trees and stuff, you maybe have less damage
Mhm.
long term, at least hopefully, or you recover faster and you can do it again next week. And so
Yeah.
moving from that, then we had a practitioner come in. I think it was small circle jujitsu, who was all about pressure point, kind of how to layer that into your other martial arts training.
Yep.
And that was interesting to me. And so I kind of started going down that rabbit hole. And then just, if you study particularly Chinese martial arts at all, you very quickly realize that you can't truly separate the martial from the medical by design. And I found this to be semi true of other arts as well. They're designed to be integrated. They are not designed to be separate. And so when I got out of the military, initially when I went to school, well, right outside Parkersburg, at Marietta, I was going for advertising, and that was before the show Mad Men had taken off. So guess I'm getting old. Not really, but at the time, like I had an economics and government teacher and mock trial teacher who was awesome at the school I was going to, and I was like, what do I do? Like, what do I do after school? He's like, you're good at arguing, you're good at debating, you're not dumb. He's like, you should go to law school. At the time, and this is me being a complete rebellious idiot, right? I'm like, but that's 6 years of school, and then I've got to do grunt work, and you already told me it's not like on TV. So that's like 10 years before I get to go have my own law firm and do the cool, sexy, wear the nice suits and argue against other people in suits kind of thing. And he's like, okay, well, if you don't want to do that, then the other job that would be good for you is marketing. He's like, it's high risk, high reward, and you'll be good at it. So that's what I went to school for. That, and I think I was minoring at the time in like leadership and Asian studies, because they offered Chinese, which was one of the reasons that I decided to go there. And then very quickly I realized college is freaking expensive, and I'm going to have a tremendous amount of debt. So I was like, okay, well, what's the solution to that? Go get a job, go to a cheaper school. And then at some point you realize, like, you're getting up at 4 a.m. to go work at Burger King, and like things aren't terrible, but also like, I was getting into a serious relationship, and I was kind of like, I need a real job. Like, I need actual money. How do I do that? What's the shortcut to that? And so for me, that was walking into the recruiters and being like, hey, what's up? And they looked at me and they're like, well, let's see if you can pass the test first. And then again, this is where I was a knucklehead. The Army was like, yeah, okay, cool. You're in. Your scores are good. You're like, what do you want? And my dad, who was in the Army at the time, I guess got out recently, was like, hang on, go talk to the Air Force. Like, you need to go talk to the Air Force. The Air Force, like, they take care of their people. Like, just go talk to the Air Force. And I'm like, Dad, they're never at the office.
That's true. In Parkersburg, I didn't see him once.
Yeah. I'm 19 or 20, and I'm thinking, these guys are never at the office. They're useless. Why would I want to do this? Not realizing, like, these guys are never at the office. That's exactly what you want to do.
Yes.
But like, that's the role model to follow right there. No, you take the time and you go that route. And in fairness, had I gone in the Air Force or the Navy, I may still be in. And then, like, that might have been okay, but it wouldn't have been this. Enlisted, got out, bounced around, took a couple jobs, really wanted to start my own gym, but didn't have the money. So, I had some kettlebell certs through like Strong First and some other stuff. And I really wanted to do something in that direction, but I didn't have the money, especially in Austin, to like get real estate. So I was working at 2 separate gyms, and finally I ran into another acupuncturist. I was actually getting treated because I was having sleep issues, probably from the military. And I would just like, I'd have trouble sleeping. I was having, all kinds of issues, but I'd have trouble. I'd wake up, my hands would just hurt because I'd been clenching them in fists all night.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, what is going on? Right. Just happened to have access to an acupuncturist. And in part of the conversation, one of the best things they did for me, I started sleeping better in like free treatment, but, I was like, oh yeah, I used to, like really want to go to school for this. And they were like, well, there's 2 schools in town. Why don't you go? And I'm like, that's crazy talk. I'm from Parkersburg, West Virginia. People don't do that, right? Like, people don't just go to school for things they want to go to school for. You go to school for something that you may not want to do, but it's going to make you money. That's just how you play.
Yeah. That's why accountants are born.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Like, there's like, yeah. So I looked into it, and it's funny because when I was sitting in Afghanistan as a contractor, one of the things that I realized when I was making the decision of, do I move theoretically to the Austin area, or do I go to Thailand? One of the things that I noticed about Austin, because I had some friends that were like, you should go check it out. You'll like it. We're thinking about moving there. I noticed that there were 2 acupuncture schools, and I kind of put that in the back of my mind, but I hadn't really thought about it since I gotten back into country and started like civilian life, or like full on civilian life, not military life 2.0. And so, I had that conversation. I was like, okay, cool. So the 2 things that she did is she recommended the gym that I went and worked at with a guy by the name of Matt Furman, called the Tao of Health and what was it? Health and Fitness. And it was on the street that anybody in Austin would know, called South Congress. And so she's like, you should go check this guy out. He's into a lot of the same stuff you're into, but you should go check out. He's a good guy. You should go check out his gym. So I checked out the gym, got a membership, which was helpful at the time because I just honestly I needed a purpose, right? I needed a direction to head. And then I was like, I'm gonna start looking into this acupuncture thing. So I started looking into that, realized they'll let anybody into acupuncture school as long as you can pay them. And I'm not actually paying them. So this is a win for everybody, right? Like worst case scenario, I failed it completely, but I get to go to school and I get the government to pay me to go learn Chinese medicine, or traditional Chinese medicine, to be specific. So started doing that. And then it just kind of went from there. First day of school, I think I made an Instagram post about being in school because I was like, I'm going to make this public because if I don't, I'm going to quit in like 2 weeks.
Yep.
And somehow finish the thing.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that happened.
So I do want to briefly touch on your military career because it is very exciting.
Okay.
You ran
You
source
say so.
ops.
Sort of, yes.
Could you please just give a very rough and dirty of what you did in the military? Because I think this is going to interest a lot of people, and then we'll go more into pressure points and how moving your body correctly prevents disease and dysfunction.
Sure. Well, so I signed up in the military. Initially, I had the best / worst recruiter. He was like, "What job do you have? You did great on your ASVAB. You can have anything you want. What do you want?" And I was like, "What do I need to go SF or Ranger?" Part of the problem was I had to pass a swim test, which I was not great at.
Mm-hmm.
Still not great at it. And then the other part of that was it was an 8-year contract, and I was like, not cool with that. Like, okay, what do you have for 4 years? And he's like, I can give you Patriot missile defense. You'll probably be in Germany or Texas, and it's a $30,000 bonus. And I'm like, okay, what do I do? And they're like, well, you do whatever Patriot missile defense does, which is like sit in a box and look at the screen, from my understanding. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound cool, but okay, that's $30,000. Cool, let's do that. And so you wrote the contract. I signed it. The guy who was in charge of the recruiting station, who was a Ranger, walks out 20 minutes later. He's like, I'm shredding this. You really want to do that? And I was like, no, but what else do you got? And one of the other recruiters was like, well, I have this MI position. It's called a 35 mic. And like my recruiter had like left the room. And I was like, well, what's a 35 mic do? And they're like, it's a human intelligence collector. And I'm like, well, that means absolutely diddly squat to me. They're like, you grow a beard and you throw stuff out of helicopters and propaganda. Now, the recruiter was basically wrong because what he was describing to me was psyops, which is closely related. And it's also pretty cool. Not as cool. Well, I'm biased, but so essentially I'm like, okay, cool. Sign me up for that. What kind of bonus can I get? And they're like, well, there's no real bonus with it. And I'm like, $30,000 over the course of the next 6 months for what sounds like it's going to be a pretty chill job once I get through schooling, or grow a beard and do something. And also, like at the time, I couldn't grow a beard, so that was not great, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, totally. Let's do that thing. Are you sure you can't give me a bonus? And they're like, well, we can get you like $2,000 because you have some schooling. And I'm like, $2,000, 30,000, $2,000. Yeah, okay, let's do the $2,000 thing. That makes sense. So then I went to school for that. Most of my schooling was in interrogations, which we couldn't do in Afghanistan. Like you needed higher, not so much higher clearance, but higher credentials to do that. There was like one place where they did it. After actually working with people who did interrogations, I would have been miserable. Basically, you go in and try to elicit / scream at someone until they tell you stuff that they may or may not know. Then you go back and write a report about it, and then you repeat that, and you do that for hours, and then you hopefully go to the gym and have chow.
Yeah.
Some of those guys did get jacked, though, because they did get to go to the gym a lot if there was nothing going on.
Yeah, but it'd be mentally destructive. Like,
well, I mean, yes and no. It's funny because it goes back to martial arts and even tying into traditional Chinese medicine. There's a lot of mind games in it, and that's fun. Like, I enjoy that. It's not something that I was bad at or particularly stressed about doing. But then the other side of that,
I think there's a difference between like mind games and like martial arts, versus like mind games and like psychological warfare.
I mean, there is, but you know, like at the time, I was.
But you also have to win at interrogation, Timothy.
Well, it's not even winning, right? Like you actually have to forget about winning because and that's the mistake that a lot of people made, and why I was kind of ahead of some of the people is a lot of people go in with the idea that I'm going to win, I'm going to beat this person, and if you do that, you may or may not. There are certain contexts where that violence of action mentality can work. In a lot of cases, it's more about I'm going to go in and I'm not even going to try to get to the intelligence, right? That they may or may not have. What I want to do first is I'm going to try to establish rapport, and I'm going to try to, more importantly than that, even before that, or at the same time as that, I want to try to figure out what makes this person tick, right? Like I'm going to try to figure out like why do they care? Why are they doing this? How do they feel right now? And then I'm going to figure out how can I use that to my advantage later on. And so you do this in steps. Like the biggest downside to the schoolhouse, the biggest downside to the initial mentality of most people is that they go in and they're like, "That's where I'm going, and my goal is to get there." And it's not. It's a lot of spiral. It's a lot of going around and around and around and around and getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer until hopefully you get something that's useful. The part that would have driven me nuts about that is every time you do that, you have to write a report, at least one, if not two or three. So you got to go back. So it's not just I get to go talk to the guy and chill with him and drink chai, you know, maybe smoke a cigarette or whatever, maybe get all worked up. It's no, I got to write a report for all of it. And if I'm going in, I have to have some sort of plan. I got to get approval for everything. I've got to like you have a lot of eyes on you, especially after Guantanamo. Like everything is very, even if it looks like chaos to the person you're talking to, very structured. Mm-hmm. What I got to do instead was do a lot of source meets, or I can't even really technically say source handling because I wasn't. It was, but it wasn't. But I got to do kind of source operations as where we have willing subjects who want to talk to us theoretically for whatever reason, right? Very similar in the fact that I got to fill this person out. I got to find out why. Money is, regardless of what anybody says, the biggest motivator. In fact, like day one was, you know, me sitting down with this dude to discuss things. And he's like, "Look, I'm going to tell you right now, you're new." I'm like, "Okay, you know, sure. Got it." Everybody tell you it's all about religion and it's about our values and it's about, you know, McDonald's and we hate you. I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, "It's not, it's about money. If you just give me money, I'll give you whatever you want." And I'm like, "Okay, that's cool." But also the worst motivation in the world, right? Because if you'll do that for me, you'll do that for the other guy. And I know you're talking to the other guy because if you weren't, you wouldn't be able to talk to me and tell me anything useful, right? So one of the things that we'd run into is we'd have people be like, "I know where all the HME is, the homemade explosive." They'd be like, there's a room of it over there." I'm like, "Okay, great." And, you know, initially when you get there, you're all excited. You're like, "Cool, we're going to go get this. Like, we're going to have this giant bus. Like, we're going to go kick down some doors. We're going to find this stuff. Or this guy's going to bring it, right? He's going to tell us where all the weapon caches are." And they will. But the thing is, like, they're going to replace it immediately. Like, it's literally at one point, I got a few of the people that I was talking to, right, to basically admit, like, "Oh yeah, we'll sell you whatever you want. Like, you want, you know, Kalashnikovs? I'll sell you 100 Kalashnikovs." I'm like, "Okay, well, where are they coming from?" "Oh, they come from Pakistan," you know, or whatever it happened to be, right? Whatever, insert whatever country is. So literally, they're going out buying them, turning around to us, and then selling them for more. And if you didn't ask the right questions or kind of catch on to that, it's really easy to fall into, "Well, I wrote a bunch of reports and command really likes me. I'm doing a great job." Meanwhile, all you're really doing is feeding a imaginary market.
Yep.
So that was some fun stuff, right? But yeah, so that's what I did. So people would come to me, they tell me stories. I'd put those stories on the paper, ideally, and then I'd send them to somebody else, and maybe something would happen or not. Every now and then, especially when I went out to a smaller infantry base, I would work directly with people or directly with the infantry. So I'd be able to walk in and be like, "Hey, I think there's something in that building over there, this house. Maybe we can do something about that." And then maybe we could, maybe we couldn't, right? But I was a little bit closer to it. And you kind of had to play both sides because the infantry's perspective is, well, you're on this base to help us. And they think that they're running the mission, and there's some truth to that theoretically on the ground. And if you don't understand that, well, you won't get along and you won't get very far. But the other reality to that is, like, theoretically, you want intelligence at a bigger level to be driving your missions. So I used to call it the commander's PIRs. Can I fuck it, feed it, or fight it? Like, that's all they want to know, right? Like on the ground, that's all they want to know. Intelligence, big picture wise, is very different, and also sometimes stupid because I would get questions like, "Hey, it's the middle of winter. The mountains are covered in snow. This is the scenario. But we've noticed when we go out into these villages where we didn't used to get shot at, we get shot at more. What's going on? Can you go ask your guys and write a report on that? And I'm like, yes, but also I can tell you exactly what's going on. All the people who live in the mountains have come out of the mountains because it's cold and snowy. Now they're in the villages, and when they see an easy target, they're going to shoot at it and make their money. I call up one of my guys and ask them, and they're like laughing at me, right? Like, you dumb American, how do you not? I'm like, no, I know, but I have to answer this other dumb American's question. So can you just give me an answer so I can put it on a piece of paper and send it to somebody? So, it was fun. And it was kind of cool because eventually I got to be out on the base mostly by myself, mostly making my own schedule, spending a lot of time in an infantry gym, which those are nice. Everything else on the base might suck. The gym will be nice. The chow hall out in the middle of nowhere, weirdly enough, was nice because, again, there aren't a lot of eyes on us, so we could go buy food off the local economy. And we had this dude who was an amazing cook, so it worked out.
So how long were you out there doing this?
I think at my first base, like 3 months, and I drew the short straw of going on leave, which sucked because I was going to go get my passport from Bagram, which was one of the big air bases in Afghanistan. I was on a great team for the most part, but it was a nice base. It was a reserve base or a guard. I can't remember if it was reserve or guard that owned the base at the time. One of the units from here in Texas, actually. It was just far enough away from the main bases, right? That we weren't super bothered, but it was also only like a flight. Like I could make a flight in a day and come back to anywhere bigger. So you could go do a supply run, you could go hang out. Like you're not going to do it obviously every day. Like this is a rare thing, but you could do it. So I actually got them to give me approval to fly into Bagram and get my passport. Turns out I go into Bagram. Bagram, it had its places and it got better. But one of the things, if you haven't ever been on a base like that, there's a lot of sand. It's not necessarily a lot of sand in Afghanistan. There's a lot of sand and gravel on American airfields in foreign countries, apparently. And walking everywhere gets to be a chore, especially when you're like in boots and all that. Luckily, I think at the time I was wearing civvies. So I was like in boots and civilians and not whatever we're calling them this week. But
Digis, so, I don't know, anything, everything.
Exactly. Yeah. So like, like I'm going around and then you've got to find everything. Because like theoretically you're told like, oh, it's in this building or it's in this tent or whatever. And inevitably, like maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So, I get there, didn't have a point of contact, finally find a passport office and it's closed. So I'm like, okay, not getting a passport. So I ended up for leave going to Hawaii, which, wasn't bad, but it wasn't, wasn't what I wanted to do, but it was like 3 months in. So it's kind of like you haven't even, if that, like I hadn't even been there long enough to really get into it. And then I got back and they looked at me and they're like, oh, the guy at this other base, he's not going to be there anymore. They didn't like him or something. And so we're investigating, but we're going to send you to this infantry base because we think you're the only guy that we have that can go be an adult. And I'm like, well, yes, but this is also like, you're the only guy that we can have be an adult in the Army. So it's kind of like, you're the only guy that will A, do it without throwing a fit, and B, maybe actually do it, right? As opposed to some of the other, I'm like, there's definitely more qualified people with more rank than me that you could probably put out there, but sure, send me, right? And it helped that the commander that I had at the time was from West Virginia and cool. So he's like, yeah, I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it. Like, whatever. Like, do I have a choice? And also, fine, whatever. So I showed up there in the middle of the night. I was supposed to have a room. The room that was supposed to be my room was no longer my room. I ended up spending, I think, about another 3 months living out of their transient tent, which is not a tent for the homeless. It's a tent for people that are in transit. Just to be clear, it's a little different, but kind of the same thing. And then, so I was there like the first day within 24 hours, like of flying in, landing, which means like zero sleep. I was on a mission. So I had already like won brownie points, and it didn't help. It didn't hurt that like, I think like 6 a.m. that morning, maybe 5. I was in the gym working out. This dude comes in, he gets on the one elliptical thing that works. Cause like the cardio machines are all busted and you can't do cardio on the base because like you'll get shot at. Right. Cause it's just in like that kind of location. And I'm kind of like looking at this dude. I'm like, I'm pretty sure, I have a feeling like that's either the commander or the first sergeant, but you can kind of tell the difference between officers and NCOs, right? Like anybody that's been, like, I bet that's their first sergeant, right? I didn't say anything to him. He doesn't talk to me. He's just looking at this dude with kind of a half-grown beard and like working out in like t-shirts and shorts. Like, oh, is it a new floor guy, which are like the contractors, or is it like, is this my guy? So I go to like this meeting, the commander's meeting at the end of the night after I get back from this mission, which was a fun mission. Yeah, I think I already told Aaron about my one go-to Army story. But like I get back and he's like, he already liked me. He's like, you showed up at the gym, you went on a mission all within 24 hours. Like I like you more than the last guy. but also I'm going to leave you in this transient tent. And then I'm not going to say I screwed some stuff up. I found a bunch of screwed up stuff and I reported it. And that may have been a mistake. That may have been a lack of maturity on my part or just lack of professionalism on other, but whatever.
Lower your expectations.
Right. Yeah. Lower my expectations kind of thing. Exactly. And then that was pretty much it. Yeah, that was kickoff. So then I spent 3 months in their transient tent, finally went on some real missions with them. And weirdly enough, and this is what I like about the infantry, is like, once I had done some stuff with them, they're like, oh yeah, hey, by the way, there's a room over here if you want it. And then I was like, well, actually, I'm kicking these guys out of this building that's up by the ECP. I'm taking it over. Like, that's gonna be my bedroom, my source room. They're like, well, you're gonna sleep where you meet with people, and I'm like, yep. They're like, is that a good idea? And I'm like, nope, terrible idea, but I'm gonna do it.
Yeah,
because that's what the training dictates. And so I did that for another, I don't know, 6 months or something, then went home. But yeah, it was a good time, an experience.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that I've eaten up half of your time on old Army story.
I'm sorry that I've taken that long.
No, I love your Army stories. They're fantastic. You're a captivating speaker, Ben. You know that.
Yeah, I'm not sorry for any of that.
So do you want to keep talking Army or do you want to?
No, we can talk about whatever you want.
Well, it is your episode, Ben.
Okay, well, what do you want to know about movement and dysfunction? Because that seems more productive.
We'll bring you back on for another military episode, so viewer, don't be scared. You will hear about Ben's hilarious good times getting shot at and bad times getting shot at stories.
Getting shot at stories.
Yeah. What's the biggest revelation you've had that led you to using movement as medicine?
So honestly, it's obviously it started with martial arts, right? And I grew up in the Middle Ohio Valley, as both of you, I believe, did.
Yeah.
Where people do not move enough. We have a cancer epidemic because we have plants, and nobody's going to do anything about that because that's how we all get our bread and butter, right? We have obesity, which nobody is really concerned with or seems to be able to do anything about. I shouldn't say nobody, but across the board while I was there, right? Like you're looking at, I mean, there are worse places in this country, absolutely.
Everyone was so miserable that even thinking about improving their life was not on the radar.
And I think for the people that are listening to this, it is important to understand that there are places and people in the world, at least at the time when I was coming of age, and I think this still exists, where exercise was considered, in fairness, is a luxury. It was a self-entitled kind of elitist thing that you did, like, and you were almost an asshole for doing it.
Yeah.
Like if you were like, I want to be fit, people would be like, why? Like, go get a job.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, I have 2 of them and I'm just trying to survive both of them. Like, fuck the hell off. Right.
Yeah. I think the big change in mindset for that was when Planet Fitness finally opened up on South Side and you could get like an all-inclusive membership for like $20 a month. And everybody's like, oh, fitness is affordable now for me rather than paying like the ridiculous prices for the YMCA and stuff.
Right.
But no, if you saw somebody running around, for fitness purposes.
Yeah. If
like
you didn't play
outside,
a sport, right?
Yeah. If you just saw like the neighborhood, like mom running around in the mornings or like, the power walkers at the mall, you'd be like, you got way too much time on your fucking hands. Like I'm
Must
going to
be
work
fucking
and
nice.
you're walking around the mall. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. At the time, this pissed me off a lot, right? As a slightly more mature adult or semi-adult, like I sort of understand it because there is a point to this that like the resources there are scarce.
Yeah.
Like not the access to information at the time was scarce. You can argue that shouldn't be the case now, but I don't know. And there's also the idea of like, okay, you have access to information, but do you even know how to go through it, look at it, interpret it, do anything with it, right? Do you know how to turn that information into action? Do you even know what information is actually available? But there was a lot. So we had the obesity thing. And then eventually, as I was leaving, we got hit with opioids. And those all tie together to this trifecta of kind of the mindset there. I mean, there are 2 ways to look at it. And I don't think either one is wrong. You can argue that it is a self-inflicted culture. And you can also argue that it is a culture that has been taken advantage of to an extreme. And that's kind of weird to say as, a white dude who, if you look at me, there's nothing that you should be like, oh, there's a disadvantage to anybody living there. They all look like people that should be, but it's a different place. Not that it's worse or than anything else out there, but it's not great. And, I used to be somebody who would be like, Planet Fitness is a joke gym. They won't let you do anything there. But the reality to Planet Fitness is it's affordable. Right? If I want to go live in my car right now, I can because I can go get a $20 membership at Planet Fitness, take a shower, get a workout in, and do whatever else I want to do. Right? It is kind of game changing in that regard. Now, Like I think my Gold's membership is like $32 maybe, but that's also because it goes through like my insurance slash bank. So that's why I get another $10 off. But also I live in a place where there's a Planet Fitness, there's 24-hour fitness, but then there's the other 24 something fitness. That's another kind of similar Planet Fitnessy type thing. There's Golds, I've got and then I've got all the upper scale gyms, the mid level, and then to the elite performance centers.
Right.
Like that's a very different world. And part of the reason I live here is for that reason. That's one of the metrics that I looked at when I was trying to figure out where I want to live. I'm an adult. I can live where I want. Where do I want to live? Well, I want to live somewhere where health is not a joke. It is a priority because that's important to me. I'm going to raise my kid or I'm going to have a kid. In the Middle Ohio Valley in Appalachia, it's not. It's just like flat out. It is a culture of you might play sports in high school and win. If you're good enough, you go to college and you might play in college. And if you stay at home, you're going to, after that, get a job, sit on a couch and drink every night. Or if you don't drink, you're going to go to church on Sunday and you're going to eat way more than you should every night because somehow those two things are different. One of those is okay and the other might not be, depending on kind of like where you're at, right? But it's going to be something like that. Those are the options. There wasn't really a path of, and that was one of the things that like really I think drew me. Like I'd always wanted to study martial arts. The fact that I wanted to fight, right? I want to be able to take care of myself because again, I don't know, white, Anglo-Saxon, Christian, very fundamentalist raised kid. That's what I was supposed to be good at. I mean, I was playing with army men like when I was 2, right? Like that was the option. Again, and it goes back to that same principle. Like, hey, if you want to be good at sports, well, no, that's an entitlement thing. That's a luxury thing. So there was a lot of that. So martial arts, was something you could do from day one till you die. Like you modify it, you adapt it, you change things, but it's an option. It's an operating system that you can carry with you everywhere. It doesn't, once you have it, it doesn't go anywhere as long as you keep up on it. It doesn't really cost anything. It gave me autonomy. It gave me a degree of self-control. I might not be able to afford a gym, but I can sit in a horse stance. I can't. I mean, I remember day one of Kung Fu and I learned the horse stance and I went home and like I already knew I was going to sign up there. Like, go home, think about it, whatever. Again, it's West Virginia. Like we don't do heavy pressured sales there because like nobody's going to trust you. Like go home, whatever. Like your free class. If you want to come back, here's how much it costs. And I already knew I was signing up. Like I think I walked in the next day with like a check. But it's like I'm going to go sit in a horse stance. I can do that. Like the only thing that cost me is time, and I have time. And so that for me was like the beginning of it, right? And then from there, it was, okay, well, now I'm in the military. I can afford to go learn with all these like really like high level talented people. And I can go learn these other systems of thought, not even just in martial arts, but in movement and fitness. And then it was kind of like, oh, you know what? There's a way to get more out of 5 push-ups than 100 push-ups. There's a way to do something really simple like crawling and getting these contralateral body movements in. That's really good for your brain and your nervous system. And it's like, that stuff's super powerful. And so then finally, when I was like, hey, I can go to school for this thing that I kind of was looking at. Because I think even like when I was in the martial arts school, when you were still there, Aaron, or like there were a few of us that were looking into, like there was an acupuncture school, weirdly enough, in West Virginia. And it wasn't too far away. And that was something I was looking into. But they're like, you have to have this many school credits. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe when I get that, it was always kind of like a backup plan that I was always like, never happened. And then like, I moved here and it's like, well, you can do whatever you want. And also like I had the resources to do it. So why not? Like, why not do something that's going to, but again, even with like the traditional Chinese medicine stuff, like there's a lot of it, right? There's acupuncture, there's acupressure, there's moxa, there's herbs, there's gua sha, which is like instrument assisted soft tissue is what chiropractors and PTs and everybody will call it now, but it's the same thing. I want to be clear. It's not just in Chinese medicine or like that stuff you can find pretty much everywhere in all your traditional medicine. Cupping, that's hijama. That comes from like the Muslim faith. That all exists in all these other places. And then somehow we get here, and I'm not saying it's better than modern science medicine because it's not, but it is a tool to use before you get to that point of, well, now I'm in a hospital and I can't do anything else, right?
I need a hip replacement surgery and I'm going to have metal put in my body because I've improperly placed weight on my hips for the past 15 years.
Right. Like I did a job that is completely one-sided, right? And I just trashed this whole side and I never stopped to do anything about it because that's not what I was taught. And somebody created a pill that'll take me out of pain, may come with a whole bunch of side effects, may risk addiction, but it's a thing I can do and I can keep working.
Aaron,
nobody ever told me I can go stick little needles into my hip and make it feel better and then teach me how to move And maybe even just somebody look at me and be like, hey, dude, you need a back brace. You need to try to lift on the other side. Let's practice that. Let's get you stronger in the gym so you can do your job better. Sorry, Tim, it looks like you want to say something.
So I wanted to ask you, right, because I'm not super familiar with it, and I've seen like the movies and everything for acupuncture, but like what actually does acupuncture do for people?
There are a lot of things. It's funny. I was just talking to a colleague about this the other day because they were getting annoyed with it, and they don't like my answer. So I'll be fair. This is my answer.
Okay.
Because a lot of people will get into the more esoteric side of what qi is, which is this thing that comes up in Chinese medicine, which is much more confusing and far more difficult than the Western world gives it credit for. But usually, if we're talking acupuncture and we're talking tiny needles, most of the time I'm working on two levels, really three, but the initial two levels. I'm working on the tissue. So maybe there's just an adhesion in the tissue or something that I can relax or loosen or whatever. And the second part of that is and this isn't true about just needles. This is true of anything. I'm working on the nervous system. And there are many ways to access the nervous system. I can do that through sound. I can do it through light. So a lot of these really hippy dippy esoteric practices that are out there, people are like, well, they're crap. And I'm one of those people, right? I'm like, but then you look at research, and I'll give you an interesting example of this. I remember going back to martial arts and Kung Fu, I was reading like a Qigong book, and it had something like, go look at the sun and do circles around the sun, one direction with your eyes 36 times in the morning, and then go do it the other direction in your eyes. Make it a circle the other direction around the sun for 36 repetitions. Don't look straight at the sun, but do this every morning and it'll do blah, 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 blah. Right. And I'm like, that sounds stupid. What could that possibly do? Whatever. Right. Turns out we now have science to show us that sun exposure in the morning at dawn, right, and sun exposure right at dusk, what does it do? It regulates sleep. It regulates hormone levels. Okay, like that's not some woo-woo qigong whatever thing from ancient China. That's modern day science.
That's how the body works. That's circadian rhythm.
Right, and there's a reason because we take in the sunlight through our eyes. So you want to do it without sunglasses on. You don't want to do it in front of a window necessarily. You want to go out and you want to get early sun exposure and late at dusk sun exposure because it will help regulate circadian rhythm. It will help you sleep.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't know that as a kid reading a book on qigong. I don't necessarily know that the guy who wrote the book or the guy going back, 2,000 years or however long it was that invented this idea knew that. What happened is they saw a correlation because they were very meticulous and detailed. They created a ritual around it, and then they passed that on. How they figured out that, hey, this is good and works well. I mean, the easy argument is observation, right? Like it was an observational science. They observed that, hey, the people who seem to get up with the sun and get sunlight before, and what you've got to think about is you also have a class system, right? So you have people who are working out in the fields, and then you have people that are living in palaces all day. Well, okay, if the people that are living, and getting up at these times are going better, well, what are they doing different? And also, I can't go tell the palace concubine to go get a hoe and start becoming a farmer. Like that's not going to work. So here's the thing, go do that, right? And so there's a lot of this stuff that works. And a lot of it, I think we're just getting to the point where scientists are starting to understand neurology a little bit or a lot. And so we're getting to this point where it's like, okay, I don't even necessarily have to put a needle in your nerve to get a reaction or have an effect on the nervous system. Like I can do all this other stuff. Like I said, you can use light, you can use the eyes, you can use auditory stimulation, right? You can use tactile stimulation of putting your hands on somebody's skin. The human body is just a giant freaking interface of different types for the brain. And so that often is how Acu is working if it's not working specifically on a piece of tissue to do something. And even if it is working on that piece of tissue, it's working on the nervous system. And then when you move deeper past the nervous system, and you can argue, this is a feedback loop, so you can argue chicken or egg, which comes first, and it probably depends. When you change something in the nervous system, you're changing chemistry. And so then you're getting a chemical reaction somewhere. And that's going to be probably specific to what you're doing, probably specific to your patient and how they experience what you're doing. So it kind of goes back to that question about time, right? And so that's more of how it's actually, I would argue, working.
Okay.
Now, some people will be like, it's chi. We're moving chi in the body and we have these organ systems, and these organ systems aren't your real organ systems. What they really are is they're a catalog. So you'll hear people talk about like liver, spleen, kidney, and they're not talking about the actual organ systems in Chinese medicine. They're talking about the Chinese liver or the Chinese, which is just a really weird way of like labeling things. What it is it's based on 5-element theory. And all 5-element theory is a way to categorize things based on observation. Does it work every time? No. Does it work enough of the time that they could build a system on it? It seems like it. At some point, I'm sure we'll get to a point where we can be really precise. And there has been studies on this. Like they've taken like acupuncture points, right, with MRIs to see where the brain lights up with those particular points across numerous people, to the point that you can show evidence of like, okay, when I put a needle on this point, it's actually lighting up this part of the brain that also responds to this. And so that's a really interesting thing. Unfortunately, there hasn't been enough of it, right? Because like in theory, there are a limited number of points. So you, in theory, could do that. MRI is expensive and it takes time.
Yeah.
Like just to get the machine and to get the machine for the hours that you need it is incredibly expensive.
Then you got to pay the person to operate it. And
Exactly.
then you got to pay for the power to operate it.
Right.
It's too much.
Right. You've got, you know, and acupuncturists are not the most organized. They're not the most scientific. They're not the most well-spoken. And then on top of that, you have, even if you have researchers who want to do it just for the sake of doing the research, right? It's expensive and it's not going to be backed. It's not pharmaceutical, right? There's not a shit ton of money out there to go into it. And pharmaceuticals are fine within context.
Yeah.
But there are also people who have manipulated that system, not all of them. Oftentimes not the scientists and the doctors that get shit on for it. Often it's marketing and sales reps and a whole bunch of other people. There are plenty of documentaries. People can go watch that stuff and go down the rabbit holes. It's depressing. I made it to like episode 5 of whatever the Netflix version of it is. Before I was like, I'm freaking depressed. This is maybe not the thing right now. I'm going to go watch a documentary on mushrooms. But yeah, so there is more of a push to do that kind of research, and it is happening, but it's slow. And it's
right.
It's not going to ever be, you know, it's not 100. The thing, especially with like pain, is it's never 100% precise, because I can do almost anything to treat pain and it will work at least once. I mean, you can do crazy stuff to get people out of pain and it'll work. And you're just like, I don't know why it worked. Don't know that it should have worked. Don't know that it'll ever work again, right? It's kind of like martial arts. Like I can get away with anything one time.
And in the military, that's the black box theory.
Right.
Do you really need to know how it works?
I personally think that there's a lot of benefit to understanding how it works, because the wellness community likes to get, you know, or the alternative medicine, whatever you want to call it, likes to get on their high horse soapbox about like those pharmaceutical assholes who cause an opioid crisis across the country are a bunch of dicks. Yeah, they are. But the people who are selling less than cures to people who really need them for exorbitant prices, you know, the crazy stuff. There's a celebrity that has like a dildo egg or something that's like a couple $1,000, and it's supposed to it's supposed to do some magic stuff for you. Not actual magic. Not actual.
I know
magic,
what you're talking.
I forget who.
It's supposed to like balance the pH levels and.
Well, that's a whole nother thing. But yeah.
It's in that area.
Goop.
Yeah.
Goop is the company, or maybe Goop is the Stephen Colbert knockoff of the company. I can't remember.
I think there's a documentary on Netflix called Goop that's all about sex.
But you're talking about like things that people are marketing and selling that don't really work.
That either don't really work, or you can't tell me why it works, or you're taking something that works in a context like here, and you're expanding it way out here, right? So like if you come to me and you're like, hey, can you help me get out of pain? Sure. If you come to me and you're like, they tell me that all my entire spine is destroyed and I need surgery, right? Okay, maybe you need something else for that.
Yeah.
Like there's some gray area there. And there are things that like seem to work that if you're a decent practitioner, you might provide someone with, but you're not going to tell them that they work, right? You're not going to be like, I'm giving you this to treat this. Like legally you can't say that, and you're an idiot if you do, but there are people who will go out there and make those claims and really push that. And here's the thing, a lot of the stuff I'm like, yeah, do it. One, it's not going to hurt anything. Two, it might. Like it might help, right? Not, it might hurt something.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you that for sure. And I wouldn't tell you that as an alternative to not seeking treatment that we know works, right? That we know statistically will buy you time or get you results. If you want to choose that route because you're like, hey, I understand the risk and I want to do this. Like I want to be Steve Jobs and I want to walk around barefoot, and maybe we don't have, you know, a better iPhone now because of that. Like that's your choice. Like I'm not criticizing it at all. Like that's your call.
Yeah.
But
I think that's Pascal's wager.
Yeah.
It can only benefit you.
Right. Like I'm not going to push you down that rabbit hole, and I'm not going to tell you something for that. And that's the reason that understanding, and I know I'm going on a little bit of a tangent or rant, but that's the reason why it's useful to have an idea of why this works in terms of what we understand the world to be today, because patients deserve that.
And once you understand it, you can optimize it. This works for this reason, so what else gives me that effect?
Right. And that's the conversation that a colleague and I were having, because they were like, I see these protocols for using these specific points, and I'm just like, does it even matter? I just want to give them herbs because I can just fix it with herbs. And I'm like, well, depending on what you're treating, it might not matter, right? Like it might not. Or there might be 15 different ways to do it that different people have found that work. And then it's like, well, which one's the best? I want to get you the results that you want as quickly as possible, as consistently as possible. And if I'm just kind of throwing needles, then do I know what did what?
Yeah.
So that's another thought. Like if you stick enough needles in somebody, you will get some kind of reaction.
Yeah.
Like you will get.
I've had tattoos.
Like they're tiny. Like the first day of I was all excited about it. We go in, and it's funny because like I thought there'd be some lead up to this, but literally when I went to acu school, like week 1, we had a class on needling, which was really hard. It was a really hard class for me to sit through. I think it was on a Friday, or maybe it was a Thursday, because Thursday was our last day. It was in the afternoon. Like I wasn't getting a lot of sleep at the time. And like the first hour and a half of the class was talking about needle depth, insertion, the tip, penetration,
The shaft.
the shaft. Yes, exactly. All the words. And you're sitting there with a bunch of people. I have a military background. I'm a little bit of a gym rat. And, I'm sitting there with a mixed group of class. You don't know anybody. And you're like, is no one else hearing this? Is this just me? Why is no one giggling right now? And then you find out years later, like everybody in the class is thinking the same thing. Like everybody's like, yeah, you remember that time when like they dropped us in? But anyway, like class 1, we're needling people. And I had a girl who needled what we call the large intestine channel. She needled the whole thing, every point on it. I got a reaction. My arm did not work well for like 3 days. Like it was just like done. But it was just too much. And like literally when you look at that channel and you map it out, like runs right along a nerve line, like totally makes sense that it would have that effect. But it was like, okay, yeah, it does something. Something works. Whether that's what you're going for or not, that's a different story.
I find that interesting too, that they had you guys doing it to each other, which makes sense, right? Like in the context of the class, it reminds me of like for Aaron and I, in order for us to carry the pepper spray that we do, we have to get sprayed with it. So we know what the reaction is, and so that we can properly handle the situation after we deploy it. And it makes me think of that, because it's like, okay, you have to get needled. So this way, when you're needling somebody, the reaction that they're going to get. I don't know. I find that kind of cool.
No,
I think it would have been hilarious if they just gave us 25 OCs for 50 people and we're like, go!
Have fun! It's Manhunt, but with OC. Oh, God.
No, you're absolutely. I mean, the principle behind that is kind of the same thing, and it's also the idea that like everybody is in school to do this, and we all want to do it. So like, let's front load one of the cool classes, right? Because a lot of the classes you're like, this doesn't make any sense, and I'm bored. And that's like one where you can be like, oh, okay, I'm looking forward to this because I get to go. It's kind of chill, and then we just stick needles in each other. And yeah, it gets you over that. Like, hey, if this is going to be a problem for you, probably don't want to keep going, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're not going to be able to at least put this in somebody, probably don't want to do it.
Yeah. Definitely a good idea. Because like if creating some type of like herbal tea at some point is also vital to your treatments or something, and like the class is to teach you how to properly steep a tea, I imagine that being like one of the last classes they would teach you, because it's like, this is important, but it's like it's not the needle part, and that's what everybody's here for.
Right. Well, it's funny because, and this is one of the things that kind of bugs me about my profession, because a lot of people who showed up to acupuncture, was really weird for me because I just assumed like everybody, like, how do you find acupuncture if you don't have some kind of movement or martial background or connection to the medicine, right? And I had a lot of people that, they'd never had acupuncture before. I hadn't had a lot. They had no martial background. Maybe they were coming from like massage therapy, or maybe they'd just been like a nurse or something, or they were just like, this is a cool thing, I want to do it. You had some people that were like, and it was weird to me because needles weren't and still aren't like my first line of thought for intervention, right? Like, I'm not like, oh, I want to go stick a needle in somebody. I'm more like, well, what can we do? Like the needles work, they help. There's things that they can do, but like you getting 20 minutes of an acu treatment, you'll get a really great nap. Some of the best naps I've had. Maybe it'll get you some results. It'll probably get you out of pain. But one treatment generally is not going to be enough to do anything. And if I can send you home with like a routine of things to do and you'll actually do it, generally I'll get better results. Across the board, anybody will. Because like that stuff is like so much more beneficial because you can literally do it every day. Right.
Yeah.
So there's something to that. And then also like there's a lot of other tools. Like there's a lot of other like herbs are super impressive sometimes. And I was the guy who was like I ignored herbs until I finally had a clinic rotation with herbs, and I was only using what are called patents. So those are like pre-made, you don't customize them. And the reason was it was during COVID. And for some reason they scheduled me for this herbal rotation with this guy who's a teacher of mine who's a great herbalist, Dr. Shen. He's kind of a celebrity acu herbalist here in Austin to some degree. Also, he's like a tech nerd, which is like awesome because he just like a lot of people have this like. I mean, Aaron's done martial arts. He gets this. Like sometimes you like look at somebody and you size them up wrong, and like this dude's like walking around. He was one of the few instructors that I had who really understood who was born and raised in China, but who understood American comedy. So he would like watch all the late night shows, and like that's a pretty high level understanding of like English and culture when you can like really get the humor. And then he would like make jokes that like people wouldn't get because they wouldn't expect him to make it, but like the rest of us would get it. So that was always fun, because they just be like, oh no, he's like, and they're like, no, he definitely was making fun of whatever that was. Like you guys missed that. Like that was some political commentary or whatever. So anyway, I had him, and then I had this like it was during COVID, and the herbalist like we had like an herb shop, and you'd write up your prescription, and you take it over to him. Like here's what I want to do, and then you get all the raw herbs or the custom powders or whatever mixed together, and you give the patient a formula. That's how it generally would work. Most people didn't use patents a lot unless they were kind of thought of as being lazy. They're already done. Well, it was the only option I had because the way the hours were working and we're staggering people, there was nothing there. So I was giving what were theoretically the lowest level interventions that you could do herbally, like the poor man's herb, so to speak. And I was getting just stupid results with them. And I was just like, and I didn't go into it expecting anything. I went into it kind of like, okay, this is just an easy herbal rotation. I'm not going to learn anything. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to check this box. I'm about to graduate. This is the thing, right? And it was insane. Like we had people with acne who were coming in within like 2 weeks, their acne was better. And they're like, can I just do the herbs for like the next month? Cause like paying for acne is expensive. And we were like, yeah, sure. It's like the student clinic, like, yeah, like we'll write you a prescription for the next, 3 months, come back and see us after that. And I mean, it was amazing. I had this like, I want to say 80 something year old guy who played tennis, but he hadn't been able, no, racquetball. I'm sorry, which is kind of crazy in its own right. If you watch racquetball, but he hadn't been able to finish a game in years. And we were working on his knees. We were doing a lot of acu, a lot of E-stim on his knees. So they were like, write him a prescription. I'm like, I'm not going to write this guy a prescription. Like, this is dumb. Like, this dude doesn't need herbs. He's 80 something years old. He got needles in. He's in great, for his age, he's in great shape. You know what I mean? He's doing well. But whatever, like, they're like, just write it, see if he wants it. So I write him the prescription. It's a patent and then low level intervention. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. I'm thinking he's never going to take this, right? He's probably never going to, he's going to buy it. He's not going to take it. I'm being a little judgmental about it. 2 weeks later, he comes back in for his treatment. He's like, I don't know what you guys did. Like, I don't know what you did different. He's like, I played my first full game like last week. And I'm just like, what? And I'm like I'm like going back and looking at the protocols, and I'm like, there's nothing special about what they did with the needles. It's the same stuff we've been doing for years with this guy, right? Like, he's a regular. And he's like, I think it's the herbs. And so like he kept coming for the treatments, but he was also taking the herbs and like was doing better. And I'm just like, okay, maybe there's something to this because I didn't expect it to do anything. So it's not placebo. Like I was kind of like here to sleep through this. And now the clinic I work in, we do a lot of herbals, and it's pretty cool. Like it's a cool thing that like I get amazed at how, I mean, sometimes the stuff like the jiao, which Aaron knows about, I'll be surprised because I'll be like, oh yeah, we gave you that. And people will be like, hey, that thing went away. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And then I'm like, that's impressive. I'm okay with that.
So mostly you're talking about adaptogens, right?
Not entirely. Chinese medical pharmacopoeia is broad. There are a lot of adaptogens in it.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of other things too. And I'll be honest, some of the stuff I don't think does anything. So for like example, like one of the things, we don't use it anymore, but like one of the things that's traditionally there is rhino horn. I don't necessarily think that is effective at anything. I think the theory behind it and the reason that it would show a physiological response if you gave it to somebody is the weight. Like it's going to come out the other end, more than likely. And that, if you're in a very traditional setting, might be useful, or at the very least might think that it worked, might make you think that it's doing something. There's a couple things like that. Like there's one, and I'm blanking on the name of the herb, but there's one where it talks about in the pharmacopoeia, it talks about drool, and it's like it'll stop drooling. So me and an MD had a conversation again with the the herbalist that I was telling you about, the doctor I was telling you about that I got to work with, and he would be a little more straightforward with some of the stuff. He's like, well, you got to look at why they wrote that. He's like, the idea behind the drool is they were looking at kids who had some sort of brain dysfunction, right? And the idea was that if they were slow or stupid, or and I'm not saying that that's the right word, but that's the terminology that they would have used then. They would be sitting there with like drool coming out of their mouth, and essentially what the herb was doing was making them less likely to do that over time, and also probably killing them in the process more quickly than they would have. There's some stuff there that doesn't always line up. Like Chinese medicine is not like every piece of human history is not always pretty.
Right.
You can argue that it's got like a completely male bias, and it does. You can argue that the way they found a lot of this stuff out was through torturing and experimentation on prisoners, and yeah, probably so. So like all medical history, like half of it comes from war. It's not always pretty,
And the other half was stolen.
and the other half was stolen. Yeah, there's that too.
So we kind of glossed over it, but there's you guys said some stuff earlier, an adaptogen, and then a something else. Like, what is that?
Yeah,
stuff?
nootropics.
Yeah, these words that every commoner layman knows. What do these mean? What is this?
So Aaron, do you want to take this?
Well, I'm not a doctor. Adaptogens, to my very basic understanding, adaptogens are just things that are going to help you. It's like whenever you go and get like stem cells, and it's just supposed to, they go to what's jacked up and they fix it. It's like ginseng. Ginseng is supposed to be good for you, so everyone should take ginseng because it's good for you. Nootropics are like that, but for your brain. It's like this should stimulate your cognitive function. You should be sharper, you should feel more awake, you should feel...
Okay, so you're referencing like milk thistle and then CoQ10.
Ben?
You could put those in that category. So here would be my take on it. And again, this isn't absolute. And the reason that it isn't absolute is nootropics and adaptogens aren't really defined things per se. If you do some research on them, you'll find some different definitions.
They're just buzzwords.
Well, exactly. They're marketing. Like pure and simple,
Yep.
They are marketing for things that have existed in nature. Nootropics in particular can be a natural, like an herbal. They can also be a pharmaceutical. Basically anything that's working on kind of that neurological cognitive level is the idea. Adaptogens, from my understanding, are often the category of herb or category of plant or medicine. What it will do is it will, in theory, balance neurotransmitters. So like with neurotransmitters, I can give you an amino that will go to a particular transmitter, right? Like something like 5-HTP or L-theanine, one that I like, and it will theoretically have a direct effect. And for most people, it will have a predictable effect. The problem with that is that if I don't know what's actually off, so without some kind of actual like lab work and testing, I can look at it symptomatically, and yes, sometimes I'm right. Maybe even a lot of the time you can be right. There are practitioners that will just do that. They'll be like, okay, symptoms, let's do this. You're having this acute panic attack. Here's an L-theanine tablet. Go chew this up. Come back in 20 minutes. Kind of thing. Yeah. And generally that'll work. It gets a little tricky if people are on certain medications like antidepressants, SSRIs. But an adaptogen specifically is going to be like these herbals that tend to balance out no matter where they're at. So if one transmitter is high, one's low, they're going to bring those into balance is the idea. And the idea is if I can go global like that, then I don't have to be as precise. And then I can take those and kind of just regulate everything as opposed to having to know exactly what is off, right? Because it may not be the thing that I think it is. Rhodiola is another interesting one that the Russians did a lot of research on back in the day that has some other benefits. Ashwagandha is another really interesting kind of cool one. Mm-hmm. And then you get into the Chinese ones.
Heard of that one recently. Ashwagandha. That's the one that's like that helps people regulate their anxiety and depressions, right?
It can. It can also help with sleep. It can help with hormone levels in general. And that's the other thing that's really tricky about all of this. And I'm not at all an expert on it. Is that anything that I'm changing can change anything else. Like there was a big thing about ashwagandha and testosterone. They did a lot of research on it, basically proved that ashwagandha doesn't seem to actually increase testosterone, which is what they thought that it did based on some of the earlier studies and some of the predictions based on what the herb is supposed to do. But ashwagandha does seem to regulate mood, and it does seem to help with sleep, and it seems to work on a chemical level. So if you're doing some of those other things, right, could testosterone levels increase, or more importantly, could whatever you're trying to fix because you think you have low testosterone get better? So there, you have to go a couple of steps back, and that's for like a biochemist to do. to really get into the weeds
Yeah.
and like explain that in a better way. But there are a lot of those things that seem to work really, really well that don't require a pharmaceutical drug and, you know, have, I won't say they don't have any side effects, but they have probably fewer side effects, like significantly fewer.
A whole lot of this conversation about herbs, and I'm just going to simplify some stuff. And like, obviously people getting specified herbs and like seeing like a professional like you is going to help a lot. It sounds like a lot of people, if they just started taking like normal vitamins and supplements, could probably do a lot of benefits for them that they may not realize at this time.
Yes and no. And again, this is the slippery slope. And it comes back to that, like me getting called out for always the answer is maybe. Like maybe. But really the answer is maybe. Because maybe you could just eat and get the things that you need. Maybe you could get more activity, more physical movement and get it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like I don't think your multivitamins are killing you any more than I think your microwave is killing you.
Which is a lot.
It might be a lot. And it might not be. You know, like again, this goes back to scale. You know, what is the actual impact at scale that these things are having? And so, like, I don't think taking vitamins and figuring out kind of what the supplements are that work best for you is a bad idea. You should probably do that. Finding somebody that has a decent understanding of those is probably useful. The internet, you know, can be useful, but it's the same problem across the board. You have people trying to sell you stuff.
Yeah.
So the big thing is like, look, you've got to figure out like, and then the other thing is like, sometimes it comes down to you've got to be willing to pay for it, you know, and do you want to do that or not? But yeah, there are a lot of supplements that work incredibly well for numerous things. Yeah. And again, we're talking what I call subacute or subclinical. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is you aren't bad enough that you need a pharmaceutical necessarily. That doesn't mean somebody won't write you a script, right? You don't necessarily need to be seeing a doctor every day. And so you're not at that point where like, hey, it's either I fix this or I go to the doctor, I go to the hospital. It's I have a problem. It might not be a very big problem. Or I could do something better. Or if I just adapt this piece of my lifestyle, I can prevent X, Y, and Z. And to me, that's more useful because one, it's more like it's accessible to most people. Now, it's accessible in context to most people, right? I can't get away from traffic right now. I mean, I can, but I have to move back to Parkersburg, West Virginia and live in a cancer dome full of, you know, whatever else is going on, right?
Or stop driving.
Right? So then that's the question. That becomes the question, right? Of what are the trade-offs and what are you willing to do? And understanding that contextually for the people around you is important. Because if I have somebody like, look, their bread and butter is driving in traffic, but traffic also stresses them out, I can't take traffic out of the equation necessarily, not practically speaking.
Right.
You know, I went to acupuncture school. I was fortunate to be able to do that. I run into people in acupuncture school who are like, don't have a smoothie for breakfast. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, it's cold. It's going to hit your spleen and it's going to tank your spleen chi. And I know this makes no sense to you guys at all, right? It's going to tank your spleen chi. And then you're going to have like the run. And over time, this is going to build up and this is not good. And I'm like, okay, well, what were they doing before they were having the smoothie for breakfast? Oh, they were eating McGriddles every day from McDonald's because they're sitting in traffic. And I'm like, so you're worried about the fucking smoothie? And protein is what the fuck you care about? Like you just 10x everything that they were doing by getting them onto smoothies. And now you're like, stop doing smoothies. You need to have a warm breakfast. Like it's nonsensical.
Yeah.
Yes. Who has time for that?
Yeah.
If that's your life, great. I'm like, if you're all cottage court, as I believe the kids call it today, I hope I use that term correctly. Great. That's awesome. But like, not all of us can do that. So you've got to like look at things like in context. Otherwise you go down like a rabbit hole of like, well, you should be eating 3 perfectly balanced meals every day. I'm like, no, I might have time to eat 1 meal a day.
We are coming up on time limit. I do plan on having you back probably 100 times because this is probably going to be our most interacted with episode because I want people to tell us what they want to hear you talk about.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've talked about acupressure. You've talked about kung fu. You've talked about psyops. You've talked about, you know, running sources and getting shot at and herbology. So I think there's something in this episode for everyone. And I really love that.
Yeah.
I really want to ask you about like my herbs.
Oh, the what was it? Lighter fluid and kombucha combination?
Kombucha. Yeah, man. I told Ben what was going on with me and he was like, I'm going to send you some shit. And he did.
It's a valid word. Valid explanation of that.
I've been having trouble with my circulation pretty much my whole life. And the more in tune I get with my body, the more I realize what is not working correctly. And Ben isn't going to blow smoke up my ass. I don't know if you've been able to parse that through this conversation, but Ben will say, here, do this and it might work. Or he'll say, do this, it's going to suck, but in 6 months you'll feel better. If we're talking about parasympathetic activation again, Ben might say, here's some medicine that will help you, but it's going to taste like lighter fluid and kombucha. So I do appreciate having Ben in my corner because you need honest people around you. We've talked about in Amber's episode how I introduced myself by saying, you really need to work on your posture.
Worst pickup line ever.
Well, I wasn't trying to pick her up.
No,
She
I
just
know.
had shitty posture.
Well, and I feel like that goes back to the way, and this would be a whole other topic, right? The way that we grew up. And at the time, we're like, I'm actually trying to do you a favor by being an asshole.
Yeah.
And not that you were actually trying to be an asshole, right? But like now I'm at a place where like, okay, that's maybe not how I should do that. But also then I want to ask people hey, what's up with your posture? Like, hey,
Yeah,
I've got some KT tape for that in the car. Do you want me to go grab it real quick? Like we can do something about that.
luckily in Aaron's case, he managed to walk away with a friend from that, but he could have also walked away with a not friend.
Well, I think I, it's context. It was a different time.
I've been hit a lot.
It was a different time, and I know like if she'd hit Aaron would have been like, okay, yeah, well played.
Yep, fair enough.
You want to be friends?
Yeah, Ben, you're definitely like, I don't know the right word exactly. The only thing that's kind of coming to mind is like the Wheel of Fortune. I feel like we could spin you, land on something, and just have a whole episode about that. And there's probably like 40 or 50 different topics on you. So I'm really excited to bring you back on a future episode because I've had a blast. Just us talking about time at the beginning, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I just can't wait.
That was fun. I did complain, but
Nah, that's my bad. I wasted 20 minutes.
I didn't hear you complain, Aaron. You sounded like you were having fun too, Aaron.
Aaron's like, no, you understand, Ben? Ben can make this the whole podcast. We can just go back and forth. None of us know anything about it, right?
We've actually changed our entire, we're actually just going to have Ben on every day and he's just going to talk and we're going to find a random topic to argue about.
This is your podcast now, Ben.
No, this is Ben Talks.
It's your fifth job.
All right, Ben, sign us out here.
Yep. All right.
But it has been good talking to you. Is there anything you want to talk about before we run this closer?
No, go for it.
Alrighty. Well, Ben, thank you for joining us today.
You're most welcome.
And a huge thanks to you, the listener.
This has been Brittany.
And Nicole.
With
Ben.
A huge thank you to Highland Markle for the original music. Share this episode with a friend or someone who could benefit from it.
Leave a comment below if there's a topic you want to hear our take on.
Or Ben's. All pertinent links are going to be in the episode description. Ben has a company called At Ready, which we didn't talk about at all. So we're going to put that in the show notes.
Yep. Be good to yourselves and each other.
We love you.
Peace. This is Brittany and Nicole.
Yeah, I thought that would be fun.
Yeah, we'll just leave that in there. Fuck it.